Welcome to Network Capital TV, everyone. Today I have a very special guest coming straight from Paris, Marie, who's also a published author, a TEDx speaker, and somebody who's had a multimodal career spanning different sectors. So Marie, congratulations for your book. Tell us who you are and what do you do today?
Thank you, Utkarsh. Thank you for having me today. So I've been working for the past 10 years in communications. And quite recently, I have refocused my work from, general communication, brand communication, corporate communications to personal communications. And my day-to-day, basically, I'm a trainer, I'm a consultant, and I help people and companies talk better about themselves. And this really matters to me because on a day-to-day level, it really matters that people are able to communicate properly what they do, who they are, so that they can build trust. Whether it's in terms of, a career move, you need people to understand what you do, or whether it's within a company, you also need people to trust you, especially when you are launching a new project or when, some crisis is happening, for example, and then you absolutely need to make sure people understand, where you stand, where you come from, basically.
Right. Tell us about your book first. Show us what it looks like and what's it called? How did you write it? Tell us everything.
Cool. Yeah, I'm very excited. So this is what it looks like. So the book actually came out 2 weeks ago. And I'm going to do a rough translation from French to English. It basically says, I am the brand, personal communications for people who do not like to brag.
But for, people, some of our listeners also speak French, so maybe you could do both of them. Tell us in French and tell us in English as well.
Of course. So in French, the title is La Marque, c'est moi, la communication personnelle pour celles et ceux qui n'aiment pas se mettre en avant.
Super. And this is a book which is culturally relevant in a variety of ways, right? Because say the way French communicate is so different from the way, say, the Americans communicate, and it's so different from the way Indians communicate. So tell us about how you thought of the title and what was the process of putting this book, and tell us the French quotient here, because there's, of course, a very French way of looking at life. Walk us through it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know, the Indian way of communicating so much, but when it comes to, for example, the French and the American way of communication, I actually started my career in the States. I worked in New York for a couple of years, and people really have a different way of approaching communication. It's not so much, seen as something bad, whereas in France, people are really, most of the time, they're quite cautious about putting themselves forward because you are not taught to, take too much slack, bragging about your achievement, these kind of things. And, I'm not saying it's only a French issue, of course. I think it's relevant to many different cultures, but I've definitely seen something of a cultural difference that especially teaches people and, especially women as well, but that's another topic, to just, provide good work. And if your work is good, then you will be rewarded. And that, unfortunately, we know is a lie because in French, for French listeners, the savoir-faire and the faire savoir are two sides of the same coin. So in English, I think it would be something like, your know-how and making sure people know about you. It's like, and about your work, of course, two sides of the same coin. And what really, came to my mind when I wanted to write this book is, it also came from a personal journey, actually, because I've always liked communications and I was never, super shy about, talking or, being sometimes even a little, I can be, out there on stage and I do and say things that people, would be like, oh, wow, you're so courageous or something. But I really understood quite late, actually, the big difference between communication and self-communication. And you might be the best marketer in the world. You could also suck at communicating about yourself. So this is really something that I wanted to tackle and really something that I wanted to address and take all of my expertise, everything I've learned from, branding, marketing, communication, but also entrepreneurship and working incubators and startups and innovation programs, and put all of this together to help people, like you and me, and basically everyone, not just, top management, because top management, they get media training and everything, but usually personal branding is quite reserved to this type of people, either the top management or you're an influencer, something like that, but then it's different type of personal communications. So I really wanted to bring all of these tools to everyone and make sure we understand, your brand is your value, and you need to put your brand out there and recognize your worth so you can communicate about it.
Does it ever happen to you, or like people that Americans think that you're too French and French think that you're too American?
You know what? Yes. When I came back from the States and started working in France, like people definitely told me I was like too American. I was like too, and it still happens sometimes. I mean, I've been, settling in Paris for quite a while now, but still people still tell me that sometimes. The other way around actually never happened. Like people never told me, oh yeah, you're too French. Except maybe, drinking wine or something like, oh, you're too French or too snobbish or something. But apart from that, it happened.
Okay, because I mean, a lot of people around the world are getting acquainted to Paris through Emily in Paris, a Netflix show. I'm not sure if you watched it or not, but the one aspect of that show is basically reconciling the Chicago-Paris divide and how people communicate.
Actually, from your perspective, I might watch the show because I haven't, because all of the bad reviews, and as a Parisian now, people are a bit, cringing. It's like, this is not at all what it looks like, and this is not at all, what it's supposed to be. And yeah, I must admit I haven't for that reason, but I might watch it now from your perspective, because since you are talking about it, I've been actually looking out recently in TV shows for cues and clues to put personal branding into another perspective. And maybe another type of guilt watching. I was actually so tired the other day, and I was like just watching an episode of Sabrina the witch, which is another Netflix show that is not like sexual or something, definitely not. But I don't know, she had this sentence and she was saying, oh, it's hard to be 100% authentic when you still don't know 100% what you are and who you are. And I was like, wow, it's actually, very true. And I think a lot of people get feel this way as well.
Yeah. In communication, there's so much emphasis on authenticity. I was wondering, in your book, do you talk about authenticity? And as somebody who's studied communication in various formats, what's your thought about the emphasis of authenticity in communication? What does that mean to you?
It's a very good question, because I struggled a lot with the word authenticity, and I feel like I rejected it for a long time, because I feel like authenticity is almost codified. Like there are standards to what authentic is like. And in some ways, I mean, I love for example, like Brené Brown's talk about vulnerability, but it's almost trendy to be like, oh, vulnerable, or like humble, like hashtag humble brag, this kind of things. So it's kind of like you put these guys like, oh, it's humble, and it's like, I'm vulnerable, but it's actually not that authentic. So I did not want at first to address authenticity full front, but it's definitely underlining all of the book. And in the end, it's quite funny, because for the back story of the book, we actually put this forward, because this is definitely the message that I wanted to get through. And the message is se mettre en avant et rester authentique, c'est possible, which means putting yourself forward and remaining authentic is possible. And this is really the message of the book. You can communicate about yourself. You can present yourself in a way that is positive for you, and that will also create opportunities. And you can create a marketing strategy that fits who you are, that fits your values and your objective. And of course, that still will be adapted to the environment. You're not going to communicate the same way on TikTok and, in an email, for example, and that makes sense, but still.
Well, that'll be an interesting email, written like TikTok.
So yeah, I really like the idea of authenticity, even though I did not want to name it like this at first, because I feel like it could be used as a filter. But in the end, this is something we're looking for.
Got it. I think the book is a result of 10 years of many experiments, many realizations that you've had. Talk us through your career. How did you stumble that there is a book here and something that people enjoy? Walk us through your career, the process.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's definitely a process, because when you ask me to present myself, and this is something I say, I'm a communicator, I'm a consultant, I'm a trainer, I do consulting, I advise people, I advise companies, but it is not something I have always done. And I have taken different paths during my career. I started in advertising in New York and then back to Paris, worked in, digital marketing agency in France. But at the same time,
Emily came from Chicago to Paris in advertising. Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah.
you really need to watch the show.
Okay, I'll watch it. Fine, you convinced me.
Yeah. No, perhaps you'll cringe. But it still deserves a watch. Yeah.
I'll let you know.
But sorry, go on. Yeah.
So after this short period in advertising, and I was a strategic planner, I decided that I wanted to also do something else. And somehow I lacked the creativity, like real creativity in my work. I felt like I was doing too much of, always the same kind of PowerPoints with different slides. So I was a bit frustrated. And I took night classes, evening classes in fashion design and design, generally speaking, actually, and everything about sewing and the actual, how to work about sewing. And I decided that I might start my own project. And at the time I was, and I'm still, of course, a very strong believer in, women empowerment, and I'm a feminist. So I wanted to have an impact on the world that I felt I didn't have just as a communicator or in advertising. So I started taking these classes, and I realized, like the first line you draw is from like a woman. You draw, proportion of like a silhouette, and to draw like a garment, clothes. And then when you draw the woman, you usually draw it like the fashion standards, like the size of the head is like 1:12, like the ratio between the head and body, which is something that does not happen in nature. Like in nature, you will find something around like 1:9 or 1:8, even 1:7 actually. So it is not that surprising that the last line you're drawing like on Photoshop, and as I was in advertising, I was like witnessing the last draw and the first draw, and I thought, it makes sense. Like clothes are not created properly, and also we don't take into consideration what women have to say, not just what they could look like. And at the time, also from the States, I was following a lot of the body positivity movement, and I thought it was very inspiring, but something was still missing, saying, oh, you can be pretty, in, I'm not so sure about this international sizes anymore, but like you can be pretty in size 2 or in size 12. Well, sure, but you're still there to, for your body and to be pretty, basically. And I thought it was important that the image that fashion portrayed about women changed. And so I created a fashion line, and at the time it was the first, called feminist fashion brand, and I really wanted to say it as a statement, because of course some brands were more, woke about women empowerment than others, but the feminist word was not used at the time. And I really wanted to have this kind of impact. And after a while, I started doing that, and I realized, something kind of hard, but maybe it's not for me, because I really loved working on the idea and everything, but running a fashion business was not so intellectually rewarding for me, and the creative part was not as important compared to all of the other aspects. And so I was like, okay, It's really hard. It's like intellectually for me, I don't really see myself working there for a longer period of time. And also emotionally, it was kind of, it was very difficult because I met, collections about, women, like violence in women and rape and everything. And it's such an emotional topic. And I didn't want to work on this, on a daily basis. So long story short, I take what I learned here, everything design, and also everything about also another type of communications about, public speaking, for example, that I had never done before. But through this project, I came to speak, to do a TEDx talk in front of like 2,000 people, and then another one, and conferences. And so I really realized that when you want to change the world, when you have an idea, when you have a powerful message that you want people to understand, you cannot hide behind it. You have to embody it. Because long-term ideas can be immortal. Ideas do not die, you do. But before an idea can really become immortal, first it needs to be embodied by someone.
Right.
And then another someone, and then another someone. But you need to put yourself in there. So yeah.
And what a phenomenal journey it has been, right? Like you've basically curated a whole bunch of experiments, realized, reflected, put yourself in what might have been uncomfortable situations and learned from them. And now that you're sharing these messages, as somebody who advises on communication, you talk us about the difference in communicating with different sets of clients, from your Sciences Po, like entrepreneurs and like business people, to the fashion folks, to the academia, to young professionals. What's the difference, and how does your book tie into all of that?
Just to make sure I understand your question properly, you mean how do I help people or teach different kinds of people to communicate about themselves? Is that correct?
What is the difference in the communication styles and teaching techniques to entrepreneurs and, say, fashion people and different sets of people?
Right.
If there is a difference at all, maybe there isn't.
It's a question I often have, from potential clients, for example. They want to know, do you make a difference between, like IT guys who've been working in the field for 30 years and, like young Gen Z people who are just on the market and they, know everything about communications, of course, because they're on TikTok all the time. And, this kind of like, ready-made thoughts. And to be honest, I don't think there is that much of a difference between people. At least the way I see it, it always comes down to identifying your strength. And this is something you can do whether you are, in IT or in fashion, you're young, you're old, it doesn't matter. Like you still need to identify yourself and really put like a hierarchy of what really matters, what is recognized by the world, but also what you want to put forward. And this first part about identification, and you go into introspection and also extrospection, asking other people's perspective to help you fully understand what kind of value you can really promote. And then about understanding your style, your own style of communication. And this is very important, especially today, which is why I don't believe in this thing of like, young people, of course they know about how to communicate. When you were talking about authenticity before, I think, yeah, maybe of course, the younger generation are more tech savvy. That's for sure. I don't think they are necessarily more, aware of their own bias and their own tendency to copycat a specific style of communication. Because if you take TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, it's very codified. And then you only see the tip of the iceberg and you see, oh, this is how we should communicate these days. Or like, oh, this is what works. This is only what you see. And when you really take the time to identify, first of all, where are your, professional strength, but also communication style strength. And, you can like talking, or you can be, like super good at networking like you are, or you can also be, into writing, and you can be into visual, you can be about communicating as a group. You can also like to do it, one shot or like regularly. It really depends. And when you do that, then you can really build a strategic communication plan that works for you.
Right, right. Talk to us about gender and communication.
Another very interesting topic. And another I really
Tell
struggle.
us everything.
Okay.
Let me tell you an interesting fact about Network Capital beforehand. So on Network Capital, our members come from 100+ countries. And if you look at the total number of people, half of them are women and half of them are men. If you look at the Network Capital team, there are more women than men. And the difference of communication and what you think about are apparent. But that is not the norm. Network Capital is not the norm. So talk us through this gender landscape, and if you have advice for young women or women in general trying to communicate what they bring to the table much better, what might that look like?
Well, it's true. There is a gender lens, that's for sure. Women and men are not taught to communicate exactly the same way. And when I was talking at the beginning about the cultural difference, I think it also reflects in the gender difference. However, and this is one of the reasons why I didn't want to put too much of the gender lens in the book, is because from my perspective, which might be biased, but I've seen way more differences between American style and French style than between, French women and French men. So definitely there's a bias. I think it expresses itself in different situations. For example, when it comes to asking for a promotion, we know in this situation you had hundreds of studies about it, and we know, women will be less likely to put themselves forward. When it comes to presenting themselves, when it comes to doing the work about introspection, when it comes to really understanding, you need to find your own style and not, run like, oh, everybody's doing like this, so I should do it like this. I noticed, however, women tend to be more receptive and have, again, a tendency to have more of a self-reflection capabilities, which again, it comes with education and everything. So I wouldn't say, like, oh, men are always better because of education, women are always better. That's not true. It expresses in different situations. That's the first thing that I noticed, and which is why, if I did take the gender lens, I would have to every step say, and here usually men are better, and here usually women are better. And I definitely did not want to do that. For a very simple reason, is that I was scared to do more harm than good. One study really struck me in the past when I read about it. And it was a study about a math experiment. When you take, middle school children, maybe you know about the study, and you usually, because of gender differences in education, women, like little girls, are slightly less better than little boys at math tests. That being said, when you take a class and the professor comes in and says, okay, so you're going to have a test, and usually girls perform better than boys at this test, but everyone do your best. Then what happens? Girls perform better. When you say, oh, it's a bit harder for girls, usually they're not as good, but girls, do your best. And then girls perform even less better, even less well than, the standards was like the control group. So what that means is I really wanted to avoid at all costs publishing a book. Oh, here is like communications for women because we're not as good, but hey, here we go, we can do it, girl power, whatever. So this is really something that I wanted to avoid. And I feel like personal communications is definitely a topic that can speak to everyone. And I wanted to make sure that was the case. But if I go back to the book cover, in English, it would have been so much easier because the way I translated it, I said, for those who don't like to brag. But in French, if you do that, the form will be by default masculine. And that was a difficult point. And I remember we went back and forth with my editor, like many times. It actually ended up on the desk of, the boss of the publishing house to make the decision, because so we added pour celles et ceux, which means for the female people and male people who don't like to communicate by themselves. So that was definitely something that I wanted to be there, because I don't want to make it just a gender topic, because I don't think it reflects in the same ways at every level. But I really wanted the book to be inclusive. And of course, I wanted it to speak to women, because I've been working on these topics, and it really matters to me. So that was the question.
I'm sure lots of women and men and other genders will read the book and benefit immensely from it. And I think the study is illuminating in a way, with the right kind of nudge, the performance changes. And when I read the study, I was really inspired to see the role of belief. When a mentor believes in you or a teacher believes in you, it has a direct correlation with how you perform. And many times, in the studies of women in mentoring and women in sponsorship, we notice that women have many mentors, but not as many sponsors who are there to sort of take them to the next level. And I think one part of that is also communication techniques. So I'm pretty sure that people will derive a lot of value from it. Tell me about bragging. What does bragging mean? And what does communication with bragging look like? And what does communication without bragging look like? When you put out a social media post that, hey, I did XYZ, is that bragging or something else, or authentic communication?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I just wanted to go back for a second, if that's okay, to your previous point. You were saying, yeah. I think it requires a little bit maybe of clarification. When we were talking about, women definitely lack sponsors, and they do have mentors, but they lack sponsorship. One of the reasons I was really, I became into personal communications is because myself, I do not consider myself like someone who, I hate asking. It's really something I hate. And I'm definitely a very poor saleswoman. It's really something I hate. However, I discovered when you communicate about yourself, generally speaking, when you put yourself forward a little bit, not asking anything, just, this is what I do, this is what I am, this is what I believe. And people see that. Then you don't have to sell yourself. People just come to you and they ask. And this is, I think, the beauty of personal communications. And in a way, maybe it can also help women more in that perspective, because women were not taught to ask as much as men generally. So I think it's another way to get to the same results, but with different perspective and different styles.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the clarification. That was really insightful.
Sorry. So
now let's explore bragging.
Yeah.
To bragging. Yeah, of course. How could you end a podcast without bragging, right? We got to discuss that.
Of course. Okay. So your example, I think, is a good one. Is it bragging when you post something on social media and you say, oh, this is an achievement, this is something I've done? It's not. If it's, it's really something you've done, then you're just stating the facts. And this is actually one of the advice I always give. And this is also why it's so important to going back to identifying what you're good at. Because when you write down everything that you know how to do, everything you've done, and actually even sometimes I give you have 90 seconds to put down everything you know how to do and everything you're an expert on. And I can tell you, right. you should have, something around at least 10 items. And then, of course, if you take more time, you can add even more details and anecdotes and everything. So when you know what you are saying is not pure imagination, like you're not making this up, then it's definitely not bragging. But people still feel like it is, which is why they first need to put it down on paper. Because I always see the difference when I do one specific group training. I say, okay, so everyone present yourself. And then I say, oh, okay, because I don't know them, right? So I can't know who they are and what they do. And then I say, okay, now write down everything you know how to do in your expertise in paper. And now present yourself again. And then do it again. It's a bit better. And then I say, okay, I still don't know you, right? I still know only what you put on this paper. And this is how I would present myself if I were you. And they were like, wow, it's a completely different person. But yeah, it's me. And I'm like, yeah. And nothing is made up. It's purely from what you wrote on the paper. So I think there's always a feeling of bragging. But the actual bragging, honestly, of course I see it. I mean, I would lie if I said like people don't brag. I see people bragging on social media, of course. It exists. It's definitely not the majority of people. And the majority of people I met, at least in France again, they fear they will be seen as bragging, but they're not. And I think somehow it's a vicious circle, because if you're always so, careful about, I don't want to brag, but in a way you don't give yourself the permission to put your worth out there. So when you see someone doing it, then you're like, oh, he's bragging. And in a way, you should just be doing this. Most of the time, it's not bragging, making things up. It's just this person gave herself or himself the permission to show his or her worth. And in a way, you can either take it as, oh, this is bad, these people are like selling themselves or bragging, or you can also take it as giving yourself permission to do the same.
So should French be a little more American and the American be a little more French? One set should brag a little less, the other brag a little more, or be less guilty about doing either?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think we should definitely free ourselves more from this fear of appearing arrogant, and also the fear of, having too much, ego. Sometimes the ego is definitely something that I hear all the time, and that I had to address in the book as well. Even though I'm not like in spiritual world or whatever.
I was just about to come to that. Yes.
Great. So yeah, like a lot of people are afraid of that. And I think many American people can be afraid of that as well. But I actually had many very interesting discussions about the concept of ego. Some people that are actually also in the book, some people who are very good friends who do work, with like spirituality and everything. And there's so much confusion about this word. Like people confuse ego with a bunch of a lot of different things. For example, they confuse ego with pride. When you say, oh, this person is just expressing ego. No, this person, okay, they might have pride. And, pride is a sin, if you believe in that. But ego is not a human characteristic. So you have to be really careful with that.
So tell us about the difference between ego and pride. We can't let you go without explaining that. Okay. So many French philosophers would have so much to say, but today we are here with Marie. Let her share her perspective.
Sure. So when it comes to putting yourself out there, first of all, like the ego is really what constitutes the difference between you and the rest of the world. So if your goal is to dissolve ego, and this is something that, yes, I do believe we all need, especially at this moment in time, to realize we have too much, attachment to something that are personal, to something that are, beliefs and everything. But again, this attachment to belief, you can either say, oh, I have ego, or you can say, okay, maybe I'm too, strict. I'm not open-minded enough. I'm not empathetic enough. And when you let go of the word ego, I think you can actually let go more of the things that lie behind it, because then when you properly name it, then you can address it. And maybe you can address the fact that you're not open to other people, or maybe you can address the fact that, you know, you have too much pride. For example, you don't like when people tell you you're wrong, or you have too much pride and you're not, you know, letting enough people benefit from your light as well. And I think when it comes to the struggle with ego, I often hear as well the fear of taking too much and not giving enough. But that's also a false issue, because when you take the light in, then you can also, you know, make it shine back to other people. When you don't want to take any light at all, you can't send back anything at all, because you didn't take anything. And especially in companies, when I work with, you know, managers, sometimes they're, you know, super hardworking, and it always comes from very good intentions. Like, oh, I don't want to put myself out there. Like, I want my team to benefit from it. But sometimes your team also needs you to take your place, to communicate about yourself. And then you'll get this promotion, and then you can take your team with you. And then, you know, the CEO of the company can know how good your work is. And then you can also, you know, make sure your team also get all the pat in the back they also, you know, deserve. But if you don't want to take anything, you can't do that.
Yeah. Marie, have you heard of René Girard?
René Girard?
Yeah.
No, I don't think
Just
so.
a philosopher. Do you think that when people try and develop their communication styles, they try to sound like a person they admire? Do you see a lot of mimicking when it comes to communication style?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I'll check it out. I'm not sure I understood the name properly, but absolutely. Yes. A lot of people quite instinctively want to benchmark what is around them. And it's like, oh, I really like how this person communicates. And then you end up in a copycat situation. And in order to avoid that, and this is also an exercise I give in the book, and I call it mirror, mirror, is you look at someone that you admire, but you look at it as if it's, you know, a mirror to yourself. So first, instead of doing comparison, you need to switch to inspiration. And how does this person inspire you? Specifically what? And once you identify that, you can move from inspiration to integration. And you only integrate what makes sense for you. For example, I have tons of friends, super extroverts, and they really love, you know, all the networking, and they go places all the time. They connect everyone. And really, I really admire them for that. But it's really not my way of communication. It's something I'm not good at this specifically. Some of the things I see, oh, these people, I like how they communicate. And these quirky pictures like this and that. It's like, yeah, I could do that. Okay, I'll take it. But you need to be really careful when you look around, not to mimic, but to make sure you only take what makes sense for you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Girard does talk about it a lot in his mimetic theory, which you're talking about in the mirror, mirror example. It's amazing. In terms of just like if you want people to remember 3 big takeaways from your wonderful book, which right now is in French, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be translated in other languages as well. What do you want the 3 key takeaways for people to be from your book?
Okay, interesting. Well, you know, I think the main takeaway I want people to remember from this book is you are your most important and long-lasting assets. So you have to, you know, invest in yourself and capitalize on it, because especially today, you might change, you know, jobs, careers, countries, you start a company and then another one, you know, everything will change. The only thing that won't is you. You can evolve, of course, but you're a moving identity. So really investing in yourself right now, especially in this changing environment, is the most important thing, and I think effective thing you can do by yourself. That's the first idea. The second idea, I think, would be about the impact you can have on the world when you start really owning your worth and who you are, what you are, and you really need to embody your ideas and your values and represent your project, not hide behind it, because this is how you can most effectively impact the world. I think that would be the second point. And the third one would be in relation with others. I think it's a question of equilibrium. You do need others' perspective and others' people's opinion to help you identify, your bias, your blind spots. But first, you need to really stand your ground, understand what you want to put out there. Otherwise, you can fall prey to, inauthentic communication because you just want to please people, or you just want to reproduce, communicate what you think people expect of you. And then you move from, personal communications to building a character.
That is phenomenal. Marie, you have to do a book launch with Network Capital Paris, and we're going to make you travel all around Europe as you talk about this wonderful book. Thank you so much for taking time out, and we look forward to hosting you very soon in our Paris office.
Thank you, Utkarsh. It was a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to debating more of Henry in Paris with you next time.
Yes, absolutely. Me too. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you. Bye.